This week on the Life Science Success Podcast, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Jenifer Wheat. Jenifer has a unique combination of skills in scientific, regulatory, and legal and business development expertise. She has extensive knowledge in biopharmaceutical manufacturing and business life cycles. Given her background and career, she's negotiated agreements internationally in the US, EU, Korea, Japan, Canada, Australia, and Middle East. Welcome, Jenifer.
Thanks, Don. It's a pleasure to be here. A pleasure to make your acquaintance and meet your audience. And hope we can provide some interesting topical information today.
Thanks so much. Can you just spend a little bit of time and talk about yourself? Talk about your career. What are some things that you've done in this space?
Oh goodness. I love what I do because it builds on so many different things. It's science, business. There's always something new. There are new trends in the industry used to be every 6 to 9 months. Now I think it's every 3 to 6 months. So there's always something new to tackle. And of course we love the social impact of making new medicines and treating patients. And, I look back, I started my working career in a laboratory at UC San Diego, and we were working on things now that we have therapies for. Right. Not to talk about personal stuff, but my father once had a colleague who, and this is 20 years ago, those biotech people, they never do anything. They spend all this money, they never come up with anything. And I discovered that my dear father had been listening to me and said, he started going on and on about Rituxan and what we'd done at IDEC Pharmaceuticals and all the patients we were treating. Like, wow, okay. So I guess we are having an impact, and that was decades ago. So and so we talked a little bit about this in planning for the podcast, in that my interest in science developed early on in life. I was a curious child. I think my parents were happy to get me out of the house, sent me to Montessori school. And I don't know if you or your audience are familiar with Montessori school, but it's geared towards sort of letting children find their learning opportunities, with the idea that before you're 5 or 6 or 7 years old, you have an innate desire and ability to learn. And they give you lots of things to work with, but pretty much throw you in an environment and give you uninterrupted time to sit there. And everything they do is very hands-on and conceptual. And the one that I always tell people about is learning math. We had metal strings of beads, squares of beads, and cubes of beads. Well, that's so basic, and it's so easy to understand addition and multiplication when you do that. And we also did things like create our own fossils with leaves and mud, which again sounds very basic. And we measured the height of planets in the sky, with from the planet with your fist. So it starts you questioning things. And I am clearly not an introvert, so I also was attracted to the people and the learning and the individual aspect of the whole thing. And now that I'm well seasoned, we won't say old, but well seasoned, I've learned we all tend to focus on things like a steak or a good wine. We all focus on the things that we're not good at and trying to be better at those. And sometimes we ignore what we're really good at. And that's kind of how I stumbled onto the business. So, I had these lab jobs, loved them, but was interested in learning about the products and, the medicine and how we were treating patients. And I had a really unique experience at IDEC Pharmaceuticals. It was biotherapy systems when it started. And there were only about 15 of us working there. We were working for a really distinguished physician from Stanford, Richard Miller. And he was working also with a distinguished physician there who provided a lot of research towards IDEC and the products that we had, named Ron Levy. And these guys got us in the lab. We were doing patient-specific antibody therapies. We got to meet the patients. We knew their names. I mean, you can't do this nowadays, but we knew their names. Our lot numbers had something to do with something recognizable. And we'd had a couple patients come visit us, and that's a little more common now. But boy, did that get you out of bed on the Saturday morning as a 26 or 27-year-old to go to work. And now, one of my neighbor's sons, some of my former colleagues in biotech, and plenty of people I know have used Rituxan. So, the fact that we got to meet those patients, we were developing all these cell lines, all these different antibodies. We had to learn the regulatory aspects. We were developing analytical methods. It was all new. And we had a lot of, you stop me if I'm getting boring, but we had a lot of
Oh, yeah.
crummy laboratory equipment by today's standards. We had, and if people aren't familiar with this lab equipment, I apologize, but we had sort of ticker tapes that looked like a grocery receipt, which collected data on these ELISA test methods. And then we thought we were really hot stuff when we got an Apple II and a Daisy Roll printer, and we could print it out on a piece of paper in about 20 minutes, right? So, I mean, if you had that now, you'd quit because it's just so frustrating. But we learned a whole heck of a lot that way. And that's how I got interested in the business also, was because we had so many different cell lines. We were working with companies like BioReliance and Quality Biotech, and we had to test the cell lines for all these viral things. We had to validate the purification processes for removing these. We had to fill out, and here's another comedy that would never happen today. You'd have a piece of paper that you typed up all your lot release tests. You probably did the lot release tests. You had to fill them in, sign it, and that was what you sent to the FDA. And back then, that wasn't, it was totally acceptable. I mean, they still monitored it and paid attention to all that, and you still had to have all the certifications and validations and everything. But we learned all that as we went. And so I thought business or salespeople were rather evil because they waste your time. But life is comedy, and I discovered I kind of had an aptitude for it. And I was dealing with what was then Microbiological Associates, became BioReliance, and they convinced me that they could throw me over the side of the boat and sell, so to speak. So it was all the things I'd been doing. I was just doing it on the other side of the fence. And it turns out it's really not complicated. You just have to understand people, what keeps them up at night, what they need, what you can offer them or not offer them. And, it's important to know when you can't help somebody and try to let them know early and try to help them find some other way to do things. So that was how I first got into business. But if you asked me my first sales job, I would have said as a 6-year-old Girl Scout selling Girl Scout cookies.
Well, it's funny though, because there are a lot of people that made this journey, right? And it's funny because I've interviewed quite a few people where they kind of say, hey, look, I was, working on the bench, and then I kind of made this transition. I guess, is there anything that makes you wish that you could go back to being at the bench, or do you really enjoy what you get to do now?
Well, I have to say, when making the initial transition, even as a manager, when you move from the lab to managing or leading, you feel a little bit of anxiety because you can't get your fingers in it. But after a while, I think the reason I love what I do so much is it's always new and changing. There's always some new technology coming, some learning, and you're combining treating patients with developing the medicines, latest technology to test them. And, in the current environment, which I don't want to use any adjectives or words to talk about it specifically, but in the current environment, then the public needs to understand these things, not just know about them, but understand them. Right. And so when you're in business, you often have your internal and your external clients. You don't just have clients that you're selling to. You got people internally. And what you're trying to do is make this mesh, help people build the relationships, figure out what they need, what they don't need, develop long-term relationships. So it's all people-based. But in science, you don't fall for the flashy ads. In fact, there's a company I can't name who did a study probably 25, 30 years ago that showed that people in science do not respond to the typical things that are in advertisements. Right. So if you do that, you're not going to work well. And then the other thing that I got, my creative nature came into play, because, oh my God, everybody's got a bioreactor and everybody's got a blue, nothing wrong with blue, but everybody's got a blue logo, and you got to catch people's attention. But how do you do that in the scientific world? So it just, for me, it's solving problems, bringing people together. And people start well, but sometimes you have difference of opinion. It can get pretty heated because you have to tell both parties, hey, the guys on the other side of the fence, they've got deadlines, they've got goals, they've got bosses, they've got patients, and so do we. And we have our clients, and the John Tabor at BMS, I hope he doesn't kill me for saying this, but he came to us one time at a company who shall remain unnamed, long time ago. And he said, it's not so much how we're working together when things are going well. He says, we can do that. He says, how do we work together when things aren't working well or there's an issue? That stuck with me. because it's just problem solving.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, the true test of somebody seems to be when problems really occur, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I was reading an article earlier today, and one of the startup entrepreneurs was commenting, how problems kind of form where a company ends as well. And I kind of think back to that quote that you just used, that it's the same sort of thing. It's it really proves who you are whenever problems occur. The real you will come out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's amazing what happens when you get through that. Then you've got a real bond and a trust that you just can't break.
Yeah.
So, and some things do work out, some things don't work out, and sometimes there is no working it out, but you got to give it your best. And so for me, going back to your question, I have a way of wandering around, but I don't miss it so much because I've got my fingers in it, and I can delve in when I love growing and building businesses, and I like watching, I'm past that needing a, gold star brownie point. Yes, I want to do well, but it's more about watching other people figure out what they can do. I'm kind of jumping ahead to all the questions you asked me at the end about what gets me fired up.
Yeah.
And if you just if you can get people inspired, get them on board, and in a new business or a growing business, you got to get everybody involved. They're all excited when you first start a business and when you start from scratch or you don't have a lot of customers, but then they've got work to do. And then you've got to convince them when they need to help you. So you have to build an organization such that you can support them so they spend as little time as possible supporting you, but at the most critical times where it matters the most, and they can provide the most impact, but still get them work. Because I told folks, probably my last 3 companies, there's a point at which you guys will scream and say, no more customers, please. And I'm kind of kidding, but it comes about where they start to get really busy and they all want to do a great job, right? And they want to make sure that they have enough time to do the work well. And so you just have to have that working relationship internally, speaking about internal customers, to make sure that they understand that you're not going to overload them. You're not going to dump something on them as a surprise. If there's something unusual, you'll recognize it and at least bring it to them so you can make a group decision. Is this the right thing for our company to do? If it's outside the norm, or if it's bigger or more unique than usual, is it good for the business? But also, is it good for the customer? So that's where the business part comes in. You kind of got to manage all different personalities to make sure that the group comes to the right conclusion, whatever that is.
For sure. And it's interesting to me because so if I start with just kind of your background, having both the science and the business aspects of it, and then also if I wrap in that piece of your education, I kind of see that same thing. It's almost like you've accumulated both a set of skills around the science aspect of things in your education, but also the business aspect. So what made you do that?
I think it was just that whole solution finding. It's in all these I was in biotech at the right time with all these growing new companies. We had to figure stuff out. Well, that's why I realized when I was thinking about all this, it kind of goes back to Montessori, figure it out. And I'm also the oldest of a bunch of kids, and we're all really close together. If I needed to get something done, I got to figure it out myself. So I think it's a combination of many things. And all of us in science or science related fields are really curious, and I'm a doer. So okay, if I don't know how to do it, nothing will make me crazier than if I can't do something. So I'll try to figure it out, and I might not know, so I'll call somebody else. And now we've got Siri and Google and all these other things.
Yeah.
That helps too.
Right.
I mean, even with the simple
and
stuff.
Skillshare and all these other places that you can learn stuff from as well, for sure.
Yeah, but it's but I think that's what it is when I was working at IDEC, we didn't know how to do anything. So the regs weren't even clear. We had to, they were to some degree, but we had to figure out, how do they apply to us? Where can we get these things done? How can we get them done? How do we keep track of all these different patients? And then how do we get how do we get all our cell lines tested and our product tested and have it, produced on time? So it's just lots of moving parts. So it just goes back to the science. Everything's lots of moving parts. The body's cells are lots of moving parts. the environment's lots of moving parts, and I'm just innately curious, and I can't stand it if I can't figure out how to do something. So I just go about it with other people or books or whatever. And so I needed to do the business stuff. And as I said, I started to realize I had a knack for it. And I had a couple of people who were kind enough to give me the opportunities. And they also reached out to me. I also had people tell me, oh, you're making a big mistake getting out of science. I'm not really getting out of science, just that, a different aspect. And so I had a lot of encouragement. And then as we grew businesses, Diasynth was a really creative business too. I got there were some really sharp people there as well. And they were leading us. And, we started off with process development and early stage manufacturing. But as we grew, we had to figure out how to do phase 3 commercial. Along with that comes the contracts. And oftentimes there's not a lawyer everywhere or a paralegal. You got to figure out, how's that going to work?
Right.
And then it changes slightly. When I got into the cell therapy side, there's a whole cadre of things that you don't have to consider in the same way when you're dealing with the standard biologic. Because once again, it's back to patient specific on the cell therapy side in many cases. So I had to learn that. So it's just, the why is just because it was there. It was something plus I bored easily also. I'm easily bored. So I like to have always something to chew on.
The other curiosity in my mind too, given kind of your opening with going to Montessori school, is almost, was your journey or need to kind of fill in these gaps or do things to support the businesses or companies that you were working for, maybe a part of your early education and foundational as well?
I think so. I mean, my parents are very pro education. They sent us all to Montessori school, and my parents were not loaded, but we were comfortable, but we weren't loaded. And he was a professor for quite some number of years. And not to get, I don't mean this to be political, it's not, but just, the US is, and I have to explain why the US is the way it is, or why I think it is the way it is to people when I travel around the world. And I said, the US is a young country. It's made up of people who come from every place else. Oftentimes when they came here, there were things going on that were unpleasant or difficult or just downright horrible. So everybody kind of came here, and you have to pull up yourself up by your bootstraps. We didn't have cities that existed. We didn't have grocery stores. I'm being a little ridiculous, but so, and then the farther west you moved, there was more and more of that. So it seems to me that that's kind of innate in a lot of Americans, and coming largely from our immigrant roots in many cases. Even my grandfather, he didn't speak English when he got here. I don't know how he did it. I really don't. But, he provided for himself and his family. And so I think it's some genetic, some environmental, some culture. But I do think that the Montessori school, I'm a big fan of that, because it brings it out in you. And it kind of goes back to that. Well, let's see what they can do, and kind of leave them alone instead of make it overly rigid. I had parents who damn well wanted us to go to college, or just because they thought, your life is easier. No one could take your education away from you. But that doesn't mean if one of us didn't want to go to college, or it wasn't right for us and we wanted to do something else, they probably would have said, okay.
Right.
So
yeah. I think it's interesting that oftentimes, that those early experiences or those early things, can lead to kind of a difference in, in the way that you approach things. And I know, oftentimes as a kid, I had to go figure stuff out. And, I frequently use that term now. I may not know it today, but I will figure it out. And it's very seldom whenever, I haven't in some way, found a solution for, a problem. And there are certainly whenever I've gone back to my educational roots as well. But whenever I think back all the way back to the very first podcast episode that I had was with Dr. Elliott Mann. And in that podcast, he was, had a more of a scientific background. And then he said, look, I needed business skills. So I went back and got my MBA. And then here we set with, looking at you've gone through, finance, business law, intellectual property, business development, all those things in your education. And I just
Mhm.
kind of, it made me curious
Mm.
again, why? So,
Yeah, and like you said, is it innate? Is it encouraged? As I was listening to you talk about that just now, I was also thinking sometimes it's not necessarily that Montessori or any particular thing brings it out. It conversely, it prevents it from getting stifled because it's so easy to just follow. And if you talk to the younger kids in families or even as adults, they'll tell you they they didn't have any, they had more people in front of them to look at just as potential role models or whatever, or just patterns, oh, they all did that, so I should do that. And then, and my youngest brother might not be happy about me for saying this, but he said he had more of a sense of accomplishment once he got out in college and got out of university, kind of finding his own way. So he learned a lot from us, and I learned a lot from him as well, to be honest, and all my other brothers. But he felt more self-accomplished once he got out from under having all these so-called expectations, which really weren't that huge in our family, to be honest.
yeah.
But
Yeah. It's always interesting to see what people imply as well. I mean, it's, hey, look, your parents want a better life for you in most cases.
mhm,
And however you get to that better life is kind of
mhm,
up to you overall as an individual. So I'm going to go back a little bit
mhm,
in
okay.
your career, right? So you went to IDEC Pharmaceuticals, you were at Diasynth, which was part of Merck at the time, CMC Biologics. As you kind of you transitioned more from, lab to quality to sales, and kind of this commercial environment.
Mhm.
Um, I guess, last few roles kind of describe for me, what have been the most, the biggest things that maybe you've learned from those roles, and what are some of the key challenges that you've had?
Oh my gosh, we could take all night. 'Cause
Well,
I
we
think
won't do
that's
that, but
thank goodness. Um, wow, every one of those companies was different. We small companies, complete startup companies, mid-sized companies, really large companies. Um, small companies, when you get started, you have a lot of freedom to do things, but you also don't necessarily know exactly which direction the company's going to end up, but you just put your head down and go. Um,
yeah, you also don't have the same structure either, but at the same time, you have more freedom, maybe.
You do. You have more freedom and you make decisions faster in some cases because there are fewer people. You still have to work together and you still have to be on a team and you still have to agree with one another at some point which direction you're going and what you're doing. But there are fewer obstacles, and obstacles aren't always bad. Sometimes they're good. It's good to have checks and balances. But yes, as you start to get bigger, okay, there are more people that you have to include. And at that point, I think it's really important. I think one of the things I learned there at Diasynth as we grew, because when I started there, it was actually Covance Biotech Services, and we got bought by multiple companies in a row over the years. And um, we started recognizing, with critical mass, you start to get 100, 150, 200 people.
Yep.
And then larger, you have to put in a structure which enables you to make decisions quickly, get all the right people involved at the right level and the right time, but not slow things down. So one of the things we did at Diasynth that I really enjoyed doing with my coworkers was starting from the front end with the business, going all the way through the pre-contract to the contract, and we had to develop good processes for not just the technology transfer, but the business expectations and transfer into the internal organization. You don't just throw it over the fence. So it's how soon do you bring the internal people into those discussions, and how many of them to enable successful development of the client with the internal people, and allow them to just gradually take it on. And then you end up becoming a supporting role as opposed to the leading role. And then we developed the whole business process all the way through program management and finance. It's classic back up to what would be financial planning and forecasting. But as we grew the business, we had to put it in place. So I learned that. And then I learned the whole RAID RACI decision-making process. And we implemented that when we got bought by AkzoNobel, which was huge for us. They had a bunch of late-stage skills. We had the early-stage skills. We kind of meshed them together. But you had 2 countries and 2 cultures there as well. It was kind of funny because when they came over to see us, they used to say, well, how come people are so nervous when we ask them questions? I said, because in the US, when somebody buys you, you don't know if you're going to have a job when you're done. And frequently people are asking questions because not everybody's going to be around. So they're a little nervous. And then conversely, when they would ask the same questions, well, when all the American customers come over here, why do they ask so many questions? Don't they trust us? Don't they think we're doing what, don't they think we know what we're doing? We said, that's not it. Under GMP in the US, they have to ask those questions. If they don't ask those questions, they're not doing their job. It's not that they don't trust you. They just need you to tell them you're trustworthy.
Yeah, I've
So,
made quite a few acquisitions, and it's one of
oh,
the key things that I think is hardest to bridge is one, cultures,
mhm,
get people to kind of understand both sides, but 2, this idea that you were bought to get rid of you just seems, sure, there's a process overall that a lot of companies have in terms of restructuring resources and things like that.
mhm,
The number one thing that they don't want to lose is whatever the core competency was
yes,
the company had whenever they bought it. They don't want to lose that same thing. So
exactly,
how do you keep that and not mess up, whenever you have to make, whatever cost control, changes or whatever. So I
exactly.
absolutely get it.
And then we went through 2 or 3 more of those acquisitions, and that's where we learned I should tell people our jobs are the same. It doesn't matter what name's on the door. I mean, yes, it does, of course, and it matters who the boss is and who the CEO is, but our jobs are the same. So the best thing we can do is do what we're supposed to do, get it done well, and then what's going to happen is going to happen. And in truth, that during that whole period, we didn't lose many people or let many people go. So it's just it. So I learned an awful lot from that. So moving through other companies and then,
What I hear in that though too is just your
mhm.
adaptability. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh no,
I hear your adaptability as well as that, your ability to think through things and at least, kind of consider the fact that, it doesn't really matter what the name is on the outside of the door. What really matters is kind of the impact and what we do day to day.
absolutely. I mean, everything we do, during the pandemic, one of the things we had to think about, how do we protect our employees? How do we protect visitors? How do we protect our patients if we're making product for them? And we didn't have the universe did not have a choice. The world did not have a choice. We've got to adapt.
Right.
And it's really important. And, we all saw some trials slow down and certain things happen. Fortunately, not so much, but, there are a lot of people that suffered because of that. So it gets you up in the morning.
Yeah,
What
for
makes
sure.
you feel good? It's not all downer. It makes you feel good that we're actually doing something that makes a difference in the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there have been plenty of people that I've managed in the past that have said, look, I can't leave and go somewhere else if I don't know and understand the level of impact that I'm going to have on patients. And so they want that,
Mhm,
that ability to tie kind of what you had
mhm,
earlier,
mhm,
how do I have an impact on
mhm.
people and their care?
You remind me of something else that was a big learning for me because when you work in contract manufacturing, you often have code names or numbers or ways to keep, added layers of confidentiality. And we used to work with our customers at Covance Diasynth. We'd have them get involved in naming the projects because that name was on everything. And then we'd have these quarterly meetings and we'd get the finance would get up and talk and the CEO would get up and talk and manufacturing would get up and talk. And then when I'd get up and give the BD speech, anybody who knows me knows one of my favorite lines is everybody's in business development because everybody is. We're just a vehicle in terms of being business people. We're connectors. We're not the people who do the work, who deliver the results. we're not the people buying the results, but we're just trying to get everybody to kind of, jump on the same bus going the same direction. And so we would give these reports about the customers. And we realized that there were, maybe out of several hundred people, there may be tens, 20, 30, 40 people who really know what the products were, what's going on in detail with these companies, what the products were for, what they were treating. So we started, divulging more of that information. Obviously, it was under confidentiality, and we were very careful with what we would say. But if we were treating XYZ disease, we could say, well, here's what this product is treating. Here's how it works, et cetera, et cetera. And then we also started providing quotes from our customers, not us, because I learned this as a salesperson. I might know everything there is to know about ABC, but nobody wants to hear it from me. They want to know I know what I'm talking about, so I can get them to the people who actually know what they're talking about. And so we started including those quotes from the customers, and that had an impact. But the biggest one was when we started telling them what the products were for, what they were treating. And you'd have people come up to you afterwards. Oh, my sister, uncle, cousin, best friend has blank, and this is so great. We're working on this. And it's connecting people internally to what they're doing. It doesn't matter if you're cleaning the windows or if you're the CEO. People really want to know what's going on, and that gets them up every day.
Yeah,
they're having an impact.
Absolutely. So there are 3 questions that I like to ask every guest.
Okay.
What inspires you?
I got to make sure I'm going to cheat and check my notes to remind myself. It's something I mentioned already. It's watching people, it works. It's at work, but everywhere else in my life too. Children, young adults, people, anybody, people realizing and coming to that recognition that they are capable of something that they didn't think they were capable of, and recognizing they can do it. And oftentimes you just need somebody to kind of, put you to the edge of the nest until you can fly. But it's just so funny because you can look at people. I mean, it's partly my age. You look at people and you say, oh, they can do this. They're more capable than you are half the time. But they're just so excited when they figure that out, the little light bulb goes on. So that's what inspires me, is seeing people when they, get to that point, or having helped people get to that point.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I know educators call that like the light bulb moment. It's just the minute that things turn on for people. What concerns you?
That's a good one, because what concerns me is it's all around communication. So, nowadays we've got more ways to communicate than we ever could have imagined. And the new technologies grow exponentially. But I'll draw an analogy to computer science, and I'm probably using an incorrect term, but it used to be we were excited to have laptops and computers and cell phones and programs. And I remember when the programs were so complicated and it was yellow letters on a black screen. But now anybody can write an app. Well, that's great because it can solve a lot of problems. But now you need an app to connect all the apps, and so it's almost like we've gone over the top. And then also during the last couple of years, I love working from home periodically, and I think it's good for people to an extent. But I think we have so many ways of communicating that help but limit other portions or other types of communication that we're missing out on, and especially kids and young adults. And I think it's getting so complex, it's becoming more fragmented. And what has worked in our favor so well also has the potential to keep us less in touch with one another. But that's one of those things. You talked about adaptability. Something will come along and take care of that sooner or later. And, after I'm dead and gone, people have many more ways to improve it. So
I guess I would have two things to add to that, right? I mean, number one, I know I'm a strong believer in, appropriate times for technology, and also just making sure that you have, time to have a personal conversation or a real connection with somebody. And it's funny because recently I had somebody, pull me aside, and we probably had our biggest sort of heart to heart moment ever. And it was because, he had just said, hey, look, I would like to, I know normally we have our normal meeting time. Rather than that, I would like to kind of set aside some time. And I learned just some great things about another individual that, normally you get these things getting to go have coffee or do other things. And now, it's, you only get your limited amount of time, and it's dedicated to a topic. And so, I really agree with you. I mean, we need to kind of still find that ability to connect as humans as well. What excites you?
We talked about this already too, is just learning things, and like, it just, you can't possibly learn everything there is to learn. One of my organic chem professors used to say, we know more and more about less and less until we know everything about nothing. But for me, I'm never bored, because there's always something new going on. There's always something encouraging. And then, this may sound a little corny, but some of the young people graduating from college these days, I am so impressed when I meet some of these people. They're on it. They're so mature. They're still young, but they're mature.
Sure.
And they just have this desire to go out and do great things in the world. And I love, same thing as the other end of not knowing what you're capable of, is just, they'll take things a step or two farther than you imagine they could. It's encouraging, given all the crazy things going on in the universe. It's just encouraging. So that gets me excited.
Yeah. Well, if somebody ever wants a great adventure, do something where you interview people for being like an intern somewhere, in the midst of, going to college or something. It's amazing to watch all of the great things that all of these younger people are doing, before they, even really get started in their career. And I mean, back whenever I was going to school, I certainly didn't have that kind of experience. Didn't do a lot of internships either. And so I think, your point is a great one. Just kind of watching, number one, the skills that people come in with are amazing. And number two, get them, turn them loose. Don't hang on to them.
Turn them loose.
Let them be creative. Right.
Exactly. Full circle. We've come full circle. Thanks for that, Don.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's great.
So thanks so much, Jenifer Wheat, for being on the podcast today. I greatly appreciate your time, and thanks a lot for being a guest.
Likewise, thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to watching many more of your podcasts.
All right. Thanks so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.